Okay, then just looping back into the topic that we finished before the break, we went through the idea of outlines, and I'm going to ask Rosanna just now to talk about the approach to structuring paragraphs. We had the question about the outline, and I talked about the stickies, and the other topic that I didn't mention, which is also quite useful, is mind maps. Okay, so mind maps are also very useful. There's great software out there on the internet. Meister is quite good. MEISTER.com. You can create 3 mind maps on there for free, and then you can actually just send the link of your latest mind map in your status report to your supervisor. He clicks on the link and he sees the mind map that you're working on. And again, it's this idea of topics and the interrelationships between the 2 topics and the tributaries of your thinking. And you know mind maps very well. It's a mechanism for representing your thinking about a certain topic. I'm just going to ask Rizwana to talk about a technique that she's used previously for structuring paragraphs.
Regarding their writing skills, and I just thought after hearing some of the struggling comments that it might be worthwhile sharing. In order to get a coherent paragraph, I designed a slow method. So it's called SLO, and if you write it on your page, you will see it's SLO. S stands for statement, meaning you tell what in that statement you say what the paragraph is about. This paragraph is about students at university. Right? The L is for literature. According to literature, almost 50% of first-year students at university fail. The O is for your opinion. That's where you bring in your voice and you tie things together. Now, of course, it's not going to be that short in our discussions and arguments, but I realized that when I've read academic articles and other books, that is very much similar to the structure that they follow. So in my moments of difficulty, I remind myself to go back to this structure, and if I follow it as it is SLO, I often come up with a coherent argument. Okay?
Great. That's very useful. Thank you, Ms. Waters.
SLO.
SLO. Statement, literature, opinion. Nice. Okay. Guys, let's now go into the micro level, and leading on from what Rosanna was talking about, the structuring of paragraphs. We're going to look at the layout of sentences and how it is that we can structure clear writing in paragraphs and sentences. But what is the problem really? And we're drawing really here from chapter 17 of the book. The problem is that we're all dealing with complexity. Okay. We wouldn't be doing a degree or writing or researching about a certain topic if someone else had figured it out. Okay? We're not creating new knowledge. That is why you are here. So the subjects that you're dealing with, by definition, are going to be complex. Okay? The problem is that we tend to allow that to permeate our writing style. So we think that because I'm dealing with a complex principle, I need to write about it in a complex way. And that is wrong. Even in the medical book that I read this morning, the guy was talking about using medical terms, okay, as opposed to common everyday terms, right? And he said use the common everyday terms always. Now this is not about the cat sat on the mat, sort of, primary school level writing. It's about clear, well articulated, well structured, meaningful writing, okay? Don't let the complexity of the content taint the style of your writing. Okay? It's your job to take that complex idea and break it down into a simple outcome for people to read. Okay. Second problem is we suffer from this delusion that because we can write in a complex and long, difficult to understand manner, we think that signifies academic prowess. Okay. And to the second language students in the room, maybe this is a fault of Western civilization, because there's been this tendency to complicate and shroud important topics so that other people can't understand them. That is wrong. That is wrong. We are in the business of knowledge and information. And we all know that knowledge shared and the democratization of information is better for civilization and the upliftment of everybody else. Okay? So don't copy that mindset. Right? It's wrong. Okay? And people that are protecting knowledge and ideas and schools of thought with complexity in their writing will eventually become irrelevant, right? Because they're not sharing it and making it easily accessible to everybody else. So don't think that to be in that mindset, you have to copy that mindset, right? It's well established, right, clearly and succinctly, even if you're writing about complex ideas, or even if you're trying to achieve academic success. I'm not saying simplistic writing, the cat sat on the mat. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's a professional but clear way of writing the rules. And convoluted writing hides our inability to think clearly. And think about how I've written my statement. If we have an inability to think clearly, right, and we spoke about this earlier, you need to solve it. You need to be able to think clearly about something. You have to. You need to make that a goal. The substance and the contribution of your research really hinges on that single most important fact. So solve that problem. Otherwise, you'll just spin wheels, you'll get frustrated, you won't build a good relationship with the supervisor, you won't make a good contribution to research. You have to think clearly. We did say earlier that focusing on a better writing style can influence your thinking, and there are other ways that you can sort that thinking out. But what I'm saying here is, if we have that inability to think clearly, right, we sometimes tend to hide it with convoluted writing. Subconsciously, not consciously. We don't intentionally go out there and say, but subconsciously we hide behind this veneer of complexity in our writing. Okay. So, Mark Twain, excellent. I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote you a long one instead. It's easy to write. And we said earlier, generative writing is the starting point. That's just to unlock the flow. That's just to get you into the writing. You can do generative writing, you can write endless nonsense and garbage. Okay? The goal of generative writing is to convert that eventually into something structured and meaningful. It's just to get you going. It's not to fill the page. Okay, the idea is even to cut it down to only what it is that you want to communicate. Right? So Mark Twain, it takes time to write a meaningful short letter, to really cut it down. And again, if you go look at that plain English website that I showed you earlier, they made exactly that same mistake. The thinking wasn't clear. They thought they were being clever. Right? And in actual fact, in those instances, the ideas were not complex. It was very mundane topics that were made very complex and difficult. Okay, so now let's break it down. Let's think about this. We all learned it in school or at some point this idea of subjects and verbs and adjectives and characters and so on and so forth. Okay, I've put two sentences up there on the screen. All right, they both say the same thing. They both communicate a fact. Okay, that this guy, this author Locke, he often repeated himself. Okay. Because he was worried or distrustful of the power of words to name things accurately. That's the concept. Okay. Now, we're writing this down so that somebody else can read it. Okay. Sentence 1 is clearer to read. Does anybody disagree? Happy if you disagree. Please, let's disagree. But general convention says that sentence number 2 is a little bit more disjointed or complex or difficult to grasp. Okay, and remember, this will be one of 1,000 sentences in a report. Okay, but what I really want to get into now is why. Okay, you need to be the first critic of your own writing. So remember, think like a reader. You need to generate writing, structure, draft, final. Then look critically at what you've written. And how do you look critically at your writing? Okay. And it's back to subjects. The subject of your sentence is the doer, the actor, the thing that you want the reader to be impacted by. Okay? And in this case, it is Locke, this author. Okay? So we're putting the subject out there. And then we know a verb acts on an object, etc. And those of you that are in English studies will be able to contribute to that a lot more than I can. But at the basic level, subject, verb, object. Okay? And in the second sentence, the subject has been abstracted into the reason. It has been removed from the main actor, the individual. Now remember, we're all human beings. We relate to people. Whether you're engineers or sociologists, it's people at the end of the day. Okay? So subconsciously you will relate to the first sentence a lot better because an individual is introduced and he does something which you've now learnt about. In the second sentence, the writer has abstracted the content of the sentence and created an extended subject, which is the reason for Locke's frequent repetition. So he's created a more complex subject to talk about. Okay? Then he explains the subject. The subject, which is now these 6-7 words, the reason for his frequent repetition. That's the thing that we're talking about now. Lies in his distrust of the accuracy of the naming of words. Okay, fine, right? That's fine. But to get into the sentence, we've had to get through a complex subject. Now, when I went through this in the book, and it explains very well, a light bulb went on to me. Because we tend to try and think that we have to abstract these concepts. And sometimes, because we're in this academic world of thinking and debating, it translates into our writing. And even if you wrote this sentence in your draft, the advice would be, can I simplify the thing in the sentence that is doing the action as much as possible? And make it as real as possible. So the subject, in the number of words and the way you describe it in the sentence, must be simple. And it must be meaningful. Okay. So it doesn't matter if you write this first off. Fine. But be critical about how you've written it. And then think to yourself, how have I treated the subject of the sentence? Or, more importantly, have I created an unnecessarily complex subject? Sort of clear? Is it happy? Okay, we'll go through a couple more examples. Does it make sense? And I mean, second language English students in the room, surely, you know, to talk and to write in a language that's not your first language, you know, you're going to naturally relate better to a simpler sentence. You haven't altered or simplified the content or the meaning of what it is that you're communicating. You've just simplified the way that a reader engages with that content. It's still about Locke and his nervousness around words and the naming and all the rest of it. But you put it out there in a much more meaningful and concise and coherent manner. Okay. Any thoughts on this one? Make sense? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to come to an exercise just now. Right, another one. So, rainforests. And it's logical. If they are stripped to serve short-term economic interest, the Earth's biosphere may be damaged. Okay. Now, subject, right? And I think it's a secondary or subordinate subject. Okay? So, the economic interests, the verb is acting on the subject. We are stripping the rainforest. Okay? And the object is the resultant or related to the object. You serve the short-term economic interests. Then in a secondary phrase, the Earth's biosphere may be damaged. So there's damage to the secondary subject over here. Okay. We can go into the English grammar if we need to. But effectively what's been done in the second sentence is to obscure the more simpler subject of the sentence. Okay? And the writer has created an unnecessarily obscure subject. Okay? For them, the subject, underlined here, is the stripping. So this stripping of rainforest in the service of short-term economic interest is your entire subject. So before you can get to any action in the story of the sentence, you've got to digest this whole subject. Logical, right? Does that make sense? But over here, rainforest. Boom. Rainforests, now tell me what happens with rainforests. It's logical. It's easy when you look at it like this, but we make this mistake. We all do. Okay? And what you really want, what you're really doing here is you're crowding out the actual story. You've told the story in an indirect manner. So you've told them about the stripping of the forests, but it's obscuring the reader's engagement with the story. Tell them that story. If there's another story that you want to tell, put it in another paragraph. And often when people condense too many concepts into a subject, it feels like they want to deal with that too quickly. They want to get on to another. But spend the time, give it the paragraph that it needs if it's valuable for your research. And even just talking at the sentence level here, you should be able to identify in your thinking where you are complicating things because it's coming out in your writing. And like I said earlier, once you understand this and some other concepts we'll talk about now, and you think more clearly because you've been critical of your own writing, when you research and you talk and you present and you discuss, you break it down. Who is doing what here? What is the story? What is the subject that is of most interest and is the easiest to present for people to get something out of? And then again, you know, the other sort of secondary subject here is the Earth's biosphere, right? And we've left the Earth's biosphere till the end of the sentence. We'll talk about now what you order in the sentences. But we've almost now left that to the end and it becomes an afterthought. And your reader is now tired for getting through this long, convoluted subject. And now it almost as an afterthought could result in damage to the Earth's biosphere. Isn't that the most important thing? You know, we're damaging. The Earth's biosphere may be damaged. So you've retained your reader up to this halfway mark here, and now you're going for the jugular. But because this is obscured here, it becomes an afterthought. And the reader is tired. There is fatigue, reader fatigue. Okay. Yes, sir?
Yeah, and I think what really makes the second sentence to be clumsy because of the extraneous material effect.
Correct. Extraneous materials, 100%. And we've created a subject that is too dense and difficult to deal with. We can all understand it. This is not difficult. But it's unnecessarily complex. Yes, sir?
Yeah. So, in that extent, the 2 or 3 examples you've given, especially looking at the second one, some persons may want to say that considering the level of your status in terms of education and training, you should be writing to a particular class of persons.
Yes.
So it will not be as simple as it should be.
Yes.
That you should not put in some, amount of thought to be able to write to that particular class. And so to a large extent, some might be thinking of the second example as the ideal thing.
As the?
Ideal.
Ideal, okay.
Yes, ideal situation, rather than the first one.
And what do you agree with?
From what you have said so far, I agree with the first one. But before now, I would say I agree with the second one.
Okay, my point exactly.
Yeah, I must confess that before now I would agree with the second one. But now, do I say the constructability now really to
Thank you, sir. Fantastic. Does anybody else agree or disagree? Does it make sense? Ma'am, you're laughing, you're right. Is it good?
Yeah.
Is it helpful? Okay, so we've had this idea of academic complexity and mystery and all the rest of it. It's rubbish. It's absolute rubbish. Break it down, make it simple and easy for people to understand. It is no indication, it's actually an indication of an intellectual superiority, that you're able to communicate meaningfully and effectively. It is. Fact. There's no question about it. Okay. But again, I'm not saying the cat's out on the mat, not the simplistic language. Okay. Like the simplistic version would be if we cut the trees, the earth will die. That's, kiddie language, right? Okay, that's, we are professional academics, right? So we talk in a sufficiently professional language and style, but not unnecessarily complex. And now you are the best critic of your own writing. Right, so let's just recap now. This is a quote directly out of the book. Readers, and you must be your own reader, think like a reader, will judge your sentences to be clear readable. Now remember, that judging is often subconscious. They don't look at each of the sentences, but subconsciously they're building a judgment in their minds. And the more dense you're making it to get through your material, the less likely they are to get through it. You want to keep your reader. And part of keeping a reader is that subjective judgmental process they go through. Make your subjects name the main characters in your story. Locke distrusted, or Locke repeated himself. Okay? Because he distrusted the naming power of words. Don't abstract the subject into Locke's distrust of the naming power of words lied in his XYZ. Okay? Break it down into the simple facts. Okay, so when you do this, when you achieve clearly written concepts, you will realize your subjects are short, specific, and concrete. Okay? Makes sense? Right? Subjects. Remember, so let's just go and look here. Okay. So I've underlined, the subjects are underlined here. Okay? This is a subject up to here. And it's an absolutely legitimate legal subject. No one's breaking any grammatical rules here. The subjects here are also underlined. And in actual fact, this one is a better example because Locke and he are the same subject. Right? And here it's a related subject or secondary subject. Okay. The point is that the subject, how simple or meaningful is the subject that you've created? I mean, you're the artist of the sentence. How simple and meaningful is the subject of the sentence? And again, I have to emphasize, guys, we're all readers, and the readers of your work, do not underline the subjects in your writing and go through it like we have. Okay? It happens up here. It's subconscious. Okay? And in the book, which I didn't have time to go into this morning, they go through examples, okay, of dense writing. And then they say, why is this dense? You know it's dense. You can't read this paragraph. It's too difficult to understand. And I think as a gentleman at the back there said, I think it's Sam is his name, said, well, we always thought it was supposed to be complex because we're now on this academic career path. Make it simple, make it meaningful, make it concise. And the result will be subjects that are short, specific, and concrete. Alright, verbs, nouns, and actions. Okay, so a little bit more complex here now. Okay, I spoke earlier about the nominalisation of verbs, right? And this is when we turn a verb into a noun. Okay? So, look at the two examples. Locke frequently repeated himself because he did not trust the power of the words to name things accurately. So, repeat in the past tense, repeated, that's a verb. Trust, it's a verb. And name, it's a verb. Okay? Now, I think so this will add to what we're learning this morning, is that we tend to subconsciously nominalize verbs into their noun equivalent. Okay? So instead of saying Locke repeated himself, we talk about Locke's repetition. Okay? So we nominalize a verb into a noun. And I see it all the time. I mean, we densify written material unnecessarily. So what are we talking about? We're actually talking about the action. Okay, so you've got characters and they do things, and that makes up the story. Okay, actions can be expressed as verbs or nouns, but it is better to express an action as a verb. as it is in the first sentence. And they've nominalized those verbs from repeat into repetition, trust into distrust. So in other words, there's a description of this trust that he did not trust, but they've combined that into distrust. Distrust is a noun. You have distrust. It is possessive, right? Of the naming power of words. So naming is a feature of the words, right? It has naming power. And we've nominalized the verb name. This is just a simple way of critiquing your own writing. One is clearer, subconsciously, than number two, because its actions are expressed as verbs, not nouns. Okay? Another example, I'll send all these slides out as well, guys. Back to our rainforest. Stripped has been converted to the stripping. Serve has been converted to service. And damaged has been converted to damage. Now, damage as a word, you can look at context. You can damage something, or you can observe damage. Damage is both a noun and a verb, which is an equally important reason why its use as a word must be preferred as a verb. Because it's always preferable to write in an active. We spoke about active and passive earlier. Always better to write in an active voice. You're an actor in a sentence, the subject is doing something to an object or with some other consequences or results. When you abstract or complicate the subjects and you nominalize verbs into nouns, you create dense writing. Okay. Right? Okay. I can see lots of light bulbs going on. This is when I read this in the book, light bulbs went on for me. Because for the first time, somebody had written down why it is that we find some writing clear and other writing complex. So let's just remember this idea of normalization, because it's important. And we take these examples of we decide, or you talk about a decision. So we decide, the government decided to ban drugs. Clear statement. The government's decision of 1956, whatever it was, now becomes a subject that includes the nominalization of the verb. So now you've created a complex subject by including the nominalization of an action. Okay, I'm trying to make that as simple as possible. But instead of just saying about he decided X, we talk about the decision of X to do something. You've now combined both of those principles to create dense writing. So we tend to talk about the failure of, the resistance of, the experimental precision of. The experiment was, rather use the experiment was precise. The precise experiment. We did frequent interviews. The frequency of the interviews was X. Okay? So what happens when we nominalize words, another thing is, we clutter sentences with articles and prepositions. Because articles, after, of, etc., have to introduce the nouns. Okay? But when we use the verbs in their rawest, simplest form, we don't need additional articles and prepositions. Okay? It's just a consequence of the other principles that I mentioned. You clutter your sentence with additional words. Okay? And you have to introduce additional verbs, because there usually has to be a verb, right? But you introduce verbs that are now less specific and less fundamental to the topic that you're writing about. Because you've created this complex subject and you've nominalized the original verb, you've got difficulty thinking about the subject, and then we still need to do some action in the sentence. You have to add some other verbs. And because you've nominalized the verbs and you've got a complex subject, you've got additional prepositions and articles that you need to add into a sentence. All right. Sort of clear. Makes sense. Okay. Any thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
I think I'm prone to make similar mistakes, especially when I'm trying to paraphrase.
You're trying to paraphrase, yeah? Good point. So what if you're paraphrasing and you're trying to bring in source material? Good example. Okay? Same principle applies. So paraphrase in a way that preserves these principles. So write about your source as if it is part of your report with the integrity of the reference. Right? You don't need to be removed from your source. It's obvious because you've cited it. So if there is a source that has experiments, talk about the precise experiments or the experimental precision of this paper as a complex subject. The precise experiments by Smith, 2001, showed that XYZ. So, good point. Thank you for that. When you're thinking about paraphrasing and citing and integrating sources, same principles apply. It's obviously not always completely avoidable, and there are some instances where you need to have reasonably complex sentences, but use them very sparingly. Okay, any other thoughts on this topic? So, nominalizing verbs, obscuring subjects. This is how we create dense and complex writing. We don't need to do it. You don't need to do it. Absolutely not. In fact, it's refreshing. When you see a writer that sticks to these principles, it's actually refreshing. You say, wow, I can read this stuff. It actually makes sense. Okay, now, we've got a little exercise here. So, sorry, Sue, would you mind just helping me just give those out? Just see if you check, right? Okay. So, another aspect of sentences is this idea of old before new. Okay? So, when you are writing a sentence, and now we're coming to this construction of a paragraph, and you're trying to achieve flow through a paragraph. Okay? The principle of old before new says that you should always start a sentence with a concept or information that is already familiar to your reader. Okay, now it's kind of logical, but we make the mistake anyway. So, in paragraph A, there's a concept here, right? And it may have been introduced prior to that sentence, right? And we have some information, and then it ends on a certain topic. Okay, I think there's a couple more. You got it, guys? You got it? Okay. A couple more at the back there, if they're on the screen. We got it at the back there. So we end on this concept over here. Okay, guys? Have I got you now? Just have a look at this, okay? We end on this concept here, this green block. It is better to start the new sentence by reinforcing this concept than by introducing a new one. And it's a very simple technique, guys. All you've got to do is just switch your sentences around. And again, for me, this was a light bulb. When I read this, it was like, where this information been for my life? Okay, so, and all you're doing is you're reinforcing what the reader has already now learned from you. Okay? Because up till here, okay, he's now got three concepts that he's got to keep in mind. Okay? But up to there, he's only got two concepts. So remember, this judgmental process happens subconsciously, at the speed of light, as people are scanning and reading the material. And it's basic logic that up to there, he's got to retain now three concepts in his mind. Up to there, he's only got to retain two. And you then giving him a chance, through the introduction of this additional concept, to be drawn into it and to develop the ability to add it into his knowledge. We can't absorb knowledge like this. It would be wonderful if we could just download encyclopedias. But we work through material linearly, we build up common ground, each of us in our different fields. Likewise, how does that happen at the microscopic level? the level of sentences and words. It happens exactly in this way here. Is everyone clear? Thoughts on this? Makes sense? Okay. So, guys, in this first paragraph, okay, there is 2 paragraphs on the old before new. What I want you to do is I want you to do exactly what I've done here, okay? And I want you just to underline the first main concept of the first sentence, and then the main concept that it ends on, right? And then, in the second sentence, the 2 main concepts that I introduced there. Do that for paragraph A and for paragraph B, and see what you observe when you do that exercise. So just like I've got on the screen there, just underline the 2 main concepts in each of the different sentences, at the beginning and the end. Okay, then do the same for paragraph B. And have a look at how they've switched the 2 concepts in the second sentence. Okay, so you should have come across this concept of the naming power of words. Okay? The naming power of words, because that is a concept, okay, in that first sentence. Then the second sentence, right, it comes in from left field with 17th century theories of language. Right? Now you're holding 2 concepts in your mind. The naming power of words, 17th century theories of language. Okay? Then it goes on, boom, 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 and it leaves naming power to the end of that second sentence. Right, then it hits you with a new era in the study of language. Now you've got 3 concepts that you're trying to hold in some sort of universe of your understanding. Okay? But look at how they switch it around in the second paragraph. Right? So now Locke is there because we presume the rest of the paper is about Locke, and we understand the reader knows who Locke is. Okay? So Locke often repeated himself, he distrusted the naming power of words. Now think about how the flow is much better. When the second sentence starts, this naming power of words. It's like a bridge. It's wonderful. Isn't it artistic? It is. It says, reader, I'm respecting your time and I'm helping you understand this concept because I've just introduced this to you. Now stay with me, right? Now this naming power of words, X, Y, Z. You know what I'm saying? We're not saying blah, 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 X, Y, Z, naming words. We're creating a bridge for the reader to go through your material. Okay? Guys, coming straight out of the book, okay? I mean, really, you must have a look at the book. Then, and the last sentence of the second paragraph talks about Locke's distrust because remember that was mentioned in the first sentence. Okay? So now Locke's distrust, we don't talk first about a new era in the study of language. We remind the users, the readers, we say, remember this guy Locke? We've established he distrusted naming power, and then we brought in the 17th century thing with a nice bridge. Then we're going to go in and we're going to say, right, Locke's distrust, etc., begins a new era in the study of language, one that focused X, Y, Z. Sorry? Happy. Okay. 100%. SLO. Absolute nice structure and nice flow between the two. Thoughts on that, guys? Does it make sense of something that maybe you intuitively knew, but now you understand explicitly? So, as you're in the flow of writing your sentences, and you start that new sentence, it also helps you, because you don't have to introduce a new concept at the beginning of every sentence each time. You can say, well, what have I talked about in the previous sentence? Where did I leave the reader? Let me start with that at the beginning of my next sentence, almost as a mini generated writing exercise. Right, then I say, then the name and power of words, okay, boom, X, Y, Z. We've brought it in there. Does it make sense? Okay. Alright. Here's my... Okay, so then this idea of complexity lost. And again, this comes a little bit more to the quantitative engineering, maybe commerce and more sciences aspects of things. And again, just bringing straight out of the book, in a sentence, try and leave complex information to the end of the sentence. Right? We'll look at a couple of examples just now. And most importantly, this is around technical terms. So guys, I mean, a lot of us deal with technical, scientific, quantitative topics, right? The simple trick as you're writing is to think like a reader. Remember that the reader is not as immersed in your subject as you are. And allow them time before you introduce that technical term or that difficult concept. And the micro-level technique of doing that is to leave it till the end of the sentence. And again, where does the temptation come from? Like with the normalization of verbs, like with the obscuring of subjects. We want to show how clever we are. Right? So we hit them with this technical term. That you're not thinking like a reader. You're thinking like a wannabe professor. Okay. And again, guys, we don't do this consciously or explicitly. We do it subconsciously. But you must critique your work consciously. Come back to it. I can put that technical term at the end. And the reason is as well, once they've gone through the technical term, then they're tired by the end of the sentence. And they're literally not actually flowing through your paragraph. They're actually going to be just jumping around. Because you haven't created a nice logical flow for them. So it's a lot more complex. And then also, this links with the previous one, because introducing a technical term also requires you to develop and explain it. Okay? So, combined with the previous principle, it's better to put it at the end of the sentence, because where's it going to go in the next sentence? Where? At the beginning. Right. Exactly. Now, if you put a technical term at the beginning of the previous sentence, and you've had to explain it, you're then jumping again with your reader. You know what I'm saying? So always think about what the reader has learned and what you want to introduce and create bridges for them through your writing. Okay, we're going to do an example now. So, also on the bottom of your pages there, the first paragraph, underline the complex element of the second sentence. Okay? Just underline in each of the two paragraphs, underline the more complex aspect of the second sentence. And just have a look at where they have placed the more complex information. What you should find is that in the first paragraph, the first part of the second sentence is this idea of the increasing demand for more land for agricultural use and for wood products for construction worldwide. Yeah? But you were just talking about forests in the previous sentence. And now you jump into increasing demand for more land for agricultural use and for the wood products for construction worldwide. But hang on a minute, we were just talking about the climate of the world depends on healthy rainforests in Asia, Africa, and South America. So you've got me in rainforest, right? Now you talk about increasing demand for land. But look at the second sentence. Healthy rainforests in Asia, Africa, and South America. But these rainforests are now threatened with the destruction by the increasing demand. So it is the increasing demand that has led to the destruction of this land and these rainforests. Okay? But we've created a bridge to introduce the readers to that technical reason for the destruction of the rainforest. It's just a simple but very powerful technique to create concise, simple writing. Thoughts on this, guys? Makes sense. We all made this mistake, okay? Yeah. Any recent thoughts or any recent examples where you've read something and now you're going to go back to it with some estimate?
Yeah. But is a linking word.
Great, good, well pointed out.
If you look for Google for academic phrase bank, you will find a whole host of linking words. So in but you will find instead of saying but, conversely, on the other hand, withstanding this fact, and it gives you a whole tree of these words that you can automatically use in that.
100%. So what Rizwan is saying is if you go back here, okay, so here, okay, where you've got old before new, this is not the exact words that is repeated here, okay? This is just the concept, right? You would link into this concept with a linking word. You can go and Google and, like Rizwan was saying, it could be but or notwithstanding or because of or whatever the case may be, okay? So you're linking, you're also creating a link in here that bridges these two concepts. Although those two concepts are the same, you still need to get the user into why you've repeated that concept. It's for their own good, but it also needs to be logical in the sentence. So you'll have a mini linking word right at the beginning of that second sentence. Okay. Any other thoughts, guys?
It's academic phrase bank.
Academic phrase bank. Okay, guys, go and have a look at academic phrase bank. Academic phrase bank. In the book, guys, I just wanted to also mention there's a great section here on choosing between active and passive. Okay, now we haven't got into that too much detail this morning, but there again, their view is active and passive. There is less of a hard and fast rule about active and passive. It is a little bit more around what it is that you're doing with the piece of writing that you're busy with, what is the content and the nature of your research, etc. But there's a great topic on active and passive. There's also a lot more detail on the characters and the verbs and who or what can be a character, etc. And then verbs and pronouns, etc. So I'd really urge you just to, it's literally 10 or so pages for you to have a look at and make sure that you grasp those concepts. It's all around 200 and following. So chapter 17. So all of this revising style is in chapter 17. And it's this idea of Mark Twain that we write long and complex writing, but then we don't go back and shorten it and make it simpler by applying the principles of simple subjects, okay? Raw verbs, so verbs that describe actions, not nouns that describe actions, alright? And then this idea of the sequence of the concepts in the sentences in our paragraphs. So introducing the reader to something, reinforcing it before introducing something new. Which fits this idea of complexity last, where you introduce now a technical term at the end of the first sentence, and you would then logically explain it. So the idea being that you must put it at the end of the sentence because you're drawing the reader into it, can't put it at the beginning because they don't know anything about it, or they may not know as much as you do about it. And once you've introduced it, you can then follow it up and develop it. I'm glad to see nodding heads. I'm really glad. Does it make sense? Okay. Okay, guys, we're on the downhill. Then there's this idea of polishing up, and you can write whole books on polishing up. And this is the idea of how long should sentences actually be. And we spoke a little bit about that earlier when we said that if you nominalize verbs, you clutter it with those articles and prepositions. All right. So if you follow the principles we've been through, you'll have clearer and simpler and possibly shorter sentences. Shorter sentences doesn't mean less important or less complex content that you're writing about. It just means that you figured out how to write about it in a way that somebody else can understand. And that's what we're all about, right? Sharing knowledge, not hiding it and obscuring it from people. So, sentence-led, then again, right choice of words. And again, this medical book that I picked up in the bookshop earlier, the medical student wanted to use the word hemorrhage in a certain context, I can't remember. Now, hemorrhage, slightly more medical than what we would normally use. And the guy said, why don't you just use the word bleed? Just bleed. It's the same thing. Just use the word bleed. So, use a simpler word, and I just want to actually quote from this book that I put up there. Style Guide. Okay, it's The Economist. Anybody read The Economist? Okay. If you want to see good quality writing, read The Economist. Okay. And it's almost subconscious that you make this evaluation of it. But once you've gone through the techniques, you'll understand the effort and the skill that goes into creating clear and simple writing. Even though arguably The Economist deals with very difficult topics, very complex political, economical, social issues in the world, but they communicate it exceptionally well. And they've got a great introduction in the book here. And all they do is they put themselves out there as thought leaders, both in the topics that they cover and the way that they write about them. And they are the best periodical in the world, most probably. And there's a couple of principles. They say never use a metaphor, simile, or figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. Okay, so the idea being there that just because you've seen other people create metaphors out of concepts, you don't have to just borrow on that. You must express it in the way that you think is meaningful for your readers. Never use a long word where a short one will do, in The Economist. Never use a long word where a short one will do. Eh? Say that to the lawyers. I agree. I agree. If it is possible to cut out a word, always cut it out. And if you find that you are needing to add words into sentences, and you're probably struggling with content, maybe you're drafting too early, maybe you need to get more results, do more reading of the literature, etc. Immerse yourself more in your topic, and then the flow of new and important information will flow better, rather than needing to add in words to pad the sentences. And it does say that never use the passive where you can use the active. Guys, sorry, before you leave, why don't you just do this evaluation quickly? Thank you so much. If you have, oh, you have. Okay. All right. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or jargon if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Simple. You do not have to use complex terms. Okay? And the golden rule of it is don't use something that you yourself don't fully understand. And I'll be honest with you, when I went through some of the material, I didn't fully understand some of the concepts, so I didn't present them today. And that should be your golden rule as well. So I was still struggling with something active and passive. It was getting a little bit technical for me. I thought, let's just stick to stuff that I know I can talk about and passionately engage you about. Right? So do the same in your writing. Okay. And what you'll find in the style guide is it goes through a whole lot of different concepts, and it breaks down, you know, based on the alphabet, all the different usages of words, etc. Just a very good guide for this topic of spit and polish. So, right choice of words, concision, so being concise, okay, grammar, again, you know, I always like to just keep a little English textbook next to me, or a thesaurus, or something like that, or there's the Brewster's Guide to Phrase and Fable. It's a bit thick, but it's useful. Yes, ma'am?
Just a point of clarification. When you talk about never using the passive and use the active, I find it difficult to reconcile with what many academics say that when you're writing out a report, the author shouldn't write in first person. He should always write in third person. So if you write in third person, you always end up using the person.
Maybe, potentially, yes. So writing first person or third person doesn't always have to be active or passive. So, you know, the cat sat on the mat, or the mat was sat on by the cat. So the active voice is the cat sat on the mat. Passive is the mat was sat on by the cat. That's still in the third person. So I agree with you, in some instances it can be difficult to switch them out. So definitely, rule number one is don't write in the first person, because then you're telling a story. Write in the third person. But in the third person, where you have the choice, use the active. Makes sense? But I don't think in first person you have to write. The first person is usually active, I suppose. But if you use active, make sure you stay in the third person. I think that's what you're saying. I think that's what your supervisor is saying. So preference for active, but when you're in the active voice, stay in third person. Okay, obviously spelling, I mean, this is basic, punctuation, and then conventions, guys. This is important. So, you know, immerse yourself in your field, in your school, your faculty, and understand the conventions. And this is where, you know, part of writing is also reading. And read up widely, as much as you possibly can. Get your hands onto good material and establish what the conventions are in your field. Okay, and then again, conventions are widely used. So when you see the same convention being used in different papers, make sure you understand how and why they've used it, and then you can borrow it and use it in your own material. And often a convention just simplifies material or summarizes it in an easily referenceable manner, that it doesn't, you don't have to explain something as a convention. So an architect or doctor might talk about something that's well established in their field that someone else in another field might not have knowledge of. It's a convention in their field. And again, whether they have to worry about a non-medical reader, that's a choice that they must make. Okay, whether they go into all the detail of the convention and list all the references as to why they're using it, or they just use the convention. And this is where your supervisor will guide you, and people in your field will also help you. Okay, guys, last thoughts, questions? We're slightly early. But yeah, blood, sweat, tears, and lots of coffee in your writing journey. I wish you everything of the very best. Hopefully you have learned something this morning. I learned a hell of a lot from that book. There's still lots that I'm going to go back to. And I would advise that you also apply your mind in the same way, be your own critic of your writing. Use and apply some of the principles that we've been through this morning. Think about the landscape of your writing journey, where it is and how it is that you're going to go in and start creating that material. Don't wait too long before you actually start committing yourself to your outcome, but don't then start too early, otherwise the planning and the thinking is then compromised a little bit. Make sure that you structure your work, make sure that you keep key concepts and the golden thread and the keywords around you and part of your everyday conscious mind. And then it must be part of your writing, but then you can also check that it is as you reread and as you assess the work that you put together. And then in the second half of this morning, we looked at the micro level, at the individual sentences, and old before new, complexity last. Right? These are all just established principles of how you write for clarity and for meaning. Okay. Guys, that's it. Was that useful? Guys, thank you very much. There's, yes, last word.
A lady called Karen. She's doing qualitative research and experiences of kids.
Put it on the, I don't know if Karen is here, but put it on the group. Guys, please put in an evaluation form and just leave it on the table there. And I wish you well in your research journeys, and I'm happy to chat afterwards if you need. Thank you very much, eh? Well done. Thank you.